Izuku had no perception of time. In the first place, it was hard to tell time when everything around him was black, a seamless bubble of darkness around him, perhaps around his consciousness. It was hard to perceive anything, really. Over the pain, he could only describe it as a tortuous pain that ran from his head to his toes, a burning, bleeding sensation across his entire body that made him writhe in agony. Yes, as he noticed, he could move. He could feel. He couldn't see. He hardly knew if he was awake or asleep. But he could feel his body struggling to be free, struggling against something that held him down. Izuku remembered vividly what had just happened. He jumped from a rooftop, quite a ways away from him home and school, so nobody would find him. Nobody would remember him. He thought he was ready for death, but no matter how much he wanted it all to be over with, he didn't change the terror he felt as he plummeted to the ground. And he remembered exactly how excruciatingly painful it was when he hit the ground. Face first. No, not the ground. He knew it was something else, something he couldn't process for the life of him, probably because the pain kept him unfocused. That was the odd thing. If he was dead, why did he remember? Why was he conscious of his being, conscious of his human body feeling human pain, instead of, well, anything else? It made no sense. What he felt then at the fall and now were almost one and the same. His body felt crushed, cracked, crumpled up, his limbs at very odd angles, his chest caved in and his skull smashed, and so much more. It had been like this for a while. Izuku couldn't even guess how long it had been, but it felt like days, weeks, months, years, and he never got used to the pain. He was used to pain. He wasn't scared easily. Plenty of times he'd been beat and blown up by Bakugo, and he knew the pain passed. This was different. So different. It was maddening. Over that time, he noticed one thing. The pain never stopped, but his body was changing. His limbs were slowly pulling into their proper places. His shattered bones were reforming. His organs moved into their proper places, until eventually it was all as it should be. Then he woke up screaming at the top of his lungs. He hadn't realized it. He groaned, so used to his voice screaming over and over again throughout the dream. Was it a dream? It took him a minute to understand he was awake. The screaming was real, the pain was gone, and, in its place, a phantom of the real feeling. His throat was so dry, though surely he'd been screaming all night, in and outside of the dream. He didn't pause to take in his bearings. Poor Izuku slumped forward, covered his eyes with his hands and sobbing. He didn't know what was going on, what had just happened. Was he alive? Was he dead? Who was he really? Was he really Izuku, or did he dream that too? His mind couldn't process what was happening, so he let out the confusion and frustration through tears that soaked into his palms and ran down his chin. Good morning, Midoriya. The voice was low and gruff, though Izuku could notice immediately it was a modulated tone, as if a formal greeting rehearsed many times. The man almost sounded happy, perhaps amused, which increased Izuku's confusion. Izuku lifted his head from his palms slowly and looked from side to side. He wiped his eyes with the back of one of his hands, clearing the remaining tears, and sniffed pitifully. Who's there? He asked, his voice shaky and high-pitched. Don't be afraid, the voice responded from somewhere out into the dark. Izuku could hardly see more than a few feet in any direction. Came footsteps. Izuku turned to the direction of the footsteps, waiting to see who it was. First off, do you remember who you are? Izuku looked down at his hands as if he had noticed that they were there. His body was there. He was still disoriented, and somehow the question made it worse. Izuku Midoriya, he confirmed mentally. It sounded right. Yes, he was sure that was his name. Izuku Midoriya, he answered. He realized the man had also said Midoriya earlier. It had to be correct. Out from the shadows came a pale, well-dressed man in a plain black suit. Multiple tubes led out the man's neck and jaw, leading back into the darkness where Izuku couldn't see. Finally, the man's face was absolutely deformed, a veiny-looking, off-colored, bulging mess of scar tissue in the place of his face. He had no eyes, no nose, no hair, and seemingly no ears. Izuku thought he should be horrified, but he found himself curious as to how the man lived. Correct, my name is All for One, but you may call me Master. Master, Izuku tried the name out, nodding to himself. It felt right. Do you recall what happened just before you got here? All for One asked, pausing in front of Izuku. Izuku knew that immediately. It was all he could think about throughout the night. I jumped, he answered. Then, realizing that wasn't a properly descriptive answer, he flushed and corrected himself quickly. I jumped off a building, and I died. I thought I died? You are alive, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku wasn't sure how to feel about that in a way. He was happy to be alive, happy to have another chance at the same time. He jumped for a reason. Did you save me? Why? He couldn't process why a random person had saved the waste of space that was him. He wasn't good for anything. He didn't even have a quirk. One for All smiled at that. All for One smiled at that, sorry. It was a smile that didn't reach the outline of his eye sockets, but a smile nonetheless. A boy happened to jump right there where I was walking. Was I supposed to just let them fall? But I'm good for nothing, quirkless, powerless, a wimpy 15-year-old that nobody wanted around. Why help me? Izuku retorted. You see, I'm giving you a chance. Has anyone else done that for you before? Izuku once again looked down at his hand, clenching his fingers into his palms. No, he responded.